Hi, welcome back to the Personality Hacker Podcast. My name is Joel Mark Witt.
And I'm Antonia Dodge. And today we're going to talk about a subject I'm a little tentative about because I don't know if I really have a fully fleshed out, like I don't know if I have the frame really rooted in my mind.
Before you get into that, let me just make a comment on that.
Okay.
This is my sideline comment, then I'll be quiet. These podcasts are not discussion enders, they're discussion starters. So I love the idea sometimes when we talk and we don't have all of the answers because that's impossible. We can't have all the answers. But I love the idea of seeding a conversation to the community, the personality hacker community. So I'll just say that.
Yeah, well, and that's a good position to come from because then it also frees us up to not know everything, which of course I don't. So
Really?
That's good. So that all said, creating that bookend, I have a Facebook friend who made this really interesting post about how he finds it baffling that men spend so much time, scoring women's attractiveness on a scale of 1 to 10, studying pickup in order to hit on beautiful women at bars and clubs and take them home, watching pornography, like all these things that men do that are really focused on female beauty. Mm-hmm. And feeling that they can rate them based on female beauty. And then they do nothing to improve their own physical attractiveness. Like, they don't work out, they don't dress well, they don't, do any sort of personal or very little personal grooming. They don't learn to dance or move in a way or stand up straight and tall. Like, they don't do anything to increase their own physical attractiveness. And yet all they can think about is the physical attractiveness of women. Now, obviously, this is not all men. He's talking about being confused by the men who do this.
Yeah.
And he said, or his hypothesis, is that men are terrified of being objectified for their looks. Like, this is like something that really terrifies them. And I find that really intriguing. Now, I don't know if that's true or not, but something in there sort of rang true for me. Like that resonated, that I think men are very uncomfortable by that. And I frequent, I'm a lurker. I don't very often comment, but I lurk on the news aggregate site called Reddit. And Reddit is spelled Reddit. It's news aggregate. It's, interesting things around the web or concepts about life. And it gets upvoted or downvoted. These different threads do based on their interestingness to the community.
Sure.
And one of the things I have noticed, now Reddit tends to skew young and male. Most of Reddit, I would say, is probably male between the ages of about 15 and 35. Like that 20-year span is most of Reddit, I would argue. And
men, mostly men.
Yeah, exactly. Males between 15 and 35. And frequently there's this complaint that if it ever comes up that these males on Reddit, not all of them, obviously not a single comment is going to represent the entire community, but I have seen this comment come up over and over, that they really hate it that men who are attractive get all the women, that they get away with murder, that all you have to be is attractive. Like, there'll be suggestions that women will give on how to be more attractive to women. And all of these guys will jump on and be like, well, no, you have to be good looking. You have to be handsome, and then you'll get the woman. And there's this bitterness around it. And every time I read that comment or a comment like that, I always think, yeah, well, welcome to being a woman. Like that's how women have been treated or feel like they've been treated for a really long time. If a woman is beautiful, she gets away with murder. That's the one that, that's the woman that all the men want. Everybody else feels like a consolation prize. I mean, these are the insecurities that women have been experiencing for a very long time. And so this idea that men would now have to deal with this, I think is really terrifying. And I'm wondering too, I know I'm going on and on. I just want to mention this really quick just to be a part of this conversation that I don't have any solid frame around. I'm wondering if a part of it is that males or men already do feel objectified, but it's always traditionally been about them as a provider.
Yeah.
Like they're used to being objectified for their money, and now they're also being objectified for how they look, right? Their physical attractiveness. And they don't think that women are being objectified as providers. They're only objectified for their looks. So it's almost like now men are dealing with two forms of objectification, whereas a woman's only dealing with the traditional one of her physical beauty.
Yeah, for the first time in human history, I would think, as I look back over human history, thousands of years, this may be the first time ever that men and women show up to the table in society. You know, when you become in a mating age, basically, you're showing up, both have resource, both have personal power, both are able to, you know, because women now have more opportunity than ever before. There's a lot of ground that still needs to be made up. Women still don't have total opportunity in the world, but it is much better than it's ever been in the history of the planet. And so when you show up at the table, it's no longer that old paradigm of, well, I'm a woman, so I've got to find a man to provide for me and take care of me. It's now, I'm fully capable as a woman. I come to the table fully capable as myself. I don't need a man to provide for me. I'm actually looking for a lifestyle companion, someone to share love and romance and my life with. I don't need him to take care of me as much. And you know, this is the shift that's happening. I can see. I don't think us men, and as a general rule, I think a lot of us are, but I don't think men in general are ready for this shift. And I think this gives rise to, you know, the kind of the maybe the women bashing or the misogynistic type tendencies that men may bring to the table. I think it's from a position, and we just talked about this last podcast, having a generosity of spirit. Why do people do the things they do? I believe it's an emergence of men fearing the new reality that's coming, and as a group of men, we're not exactly sure how to navigate this space because it's so new. The old paradigm was the man provided, at least culturally, the man provided and the woman nurtured, and they came together. They may form a family or whatever. And it was a very traditional Ozzie and Harriet 1950s dynamic, and that's shifting rapidly.
Yeah,
and I think it's scaring the crap out of men because we don't know how to deal with it.
Yeah, I'll be honest, I'm not a big history buff. I know that we've gone through different incarnations of like patriarchal societies and matriarchal societies, and a lot of variations about which genders have power in which, you know, contexts. I don't know if I can think of a culture where both genders came to the table with equal amounts of power. Like, I don't know if I can really...
Not across the board, at least.
Not across the board. Not, like, societally show up with equal positions of power. I don't think we're there yet. I mean, obviously, we're talking about developed countries. There are many, many, many cultures and countries around the world that do not reflect this reality. They're still highly patriarchal. And I think that's the more usual cultural standard, is a patriarchal society. And there are still a lot of ways in which women, I feel, need a lot more encouragement to be personally empowered in this country. Even like in developed countries, there's still, you know, we have what Jung would call the collective unconscious. And the collective unconscious and our genetic memory going back is that women are not empowered, right? Like, they're highly exploited. And so, or exploited.
Yeah.
And so, because our collective unconscious and our genetic memory is of exploitation, there's a lot of that crap that this generation of women, and probably the next, will have to unravel that big ball of yarn, where they have to figure out how to be show up as an empowered person despite that. And that said, I think we are obviously, like you mentioned, a much better position now than has ever really been the case in history in developed countries in this time period, where it's not one or the other of the genders that get to claim the power and get to fully influence society on their own terms. It's that we are now entering a place where we're qualifying ourselves to be both genders being equally empowered. And you can see that there's... we have a friend who's a relationship expert, and he says that once the honeymoon phase is over between a couple, and the honeymoon phase can last anywhere between 2 months and 2 years, he goes, what ends up happening is that you enter a power struggle phase in the relationship. And it's usually the power struggle, and the power struggle can last the rest of the relationship. It can last 50 years. But the power struggle is usually where people make or break their relationship. And I think we're in a position of a power struggle, of a gender power struggle in at least this country. And you can see that because there's a lot of, from the woman's perspective, I've seen a lot of backlash against the men's rights movement. As if men have been in positions of power for so long, how dare they get off not just letting women have full and total control in these different areas. Like, the misandry in the judicial system when it comes to like court cases is ridiculous. Like, when you enter a divorce court, or if you get divorced, the woman's gonna get the kids.
Child custody issues,
Yeah.
especially.
And you'll hear some stories about how that didn't happen and that the judge gave, the father, the primary child custody. Those are rare, though. You walk into a court and the mom's going to get the kids. And there's a lot of men who get absolutely gouged with child support. Now, that's not historically how it's been. Women had to fight for that for a long time, for decades. There was a long time period where men just, if they didn't pay their child support, nobody batted an eye, right?
Yeah.
Like, they didn't bat an eyelash. They didn't care. And, men, it seemed like for a long time, men were abandoning their families. Like, they were simply leaving. But that's not really the case right now. It doesn't feel like men are abandoning their families. It feels like it's more common, especially in divorce that isn't happening in the lower Graves levels. We've talked about the Graves model previous podcasts. And in the lower Graves models, you'll see a lot of family abandonment. But in the higher Graves levels, it's not abandoning families. They want to be a part of their children's life. And so in order to have that privilege, the courts gouge them for child support. And if they don't pay it, then they end up in prison. Now, it's understandable why that's the emergent. It's understandable that these laws have been passed to prevent what happened in previous incarnations of this, where the man abandoned the family and now a single mom has to completely raise her kids all by herself, and she gets no financial support, and the guy's completely gone. So it's attempting to correct that. And yet, right now, society's starting to change. It's starting to become that the man does want to have more relationship with their kids, and he does want to financially support them. It's more self-directed than imposed by the court system. And so because the court system imposes these things, now a new generation of men who do want to be more involved and don't want to have to, quote unquote, pay for the sins of their fathers, they're now getting men's rights attorneys that will make it more fair in the court system. And women are up in arms about this. They lose their mind about the concept of men's rights. And I find that to be really fascinating. I find it to be fascinating that there's a sense of retribution from women, that because our collective unconscious genetic memory is of women getting the short end of the stick, it's almost as if
it's time.
Right. Men now need to go through that time period. You need to get the short end of the stick. You need to know what it feels like, right? And it's not been long enough, right? Like we need it to go on for a while so you really feel this pain. And I feel like, or at least, and I could be wrong, but from my perspective, it feels like that power struggle creates an or situation where one or the other has to be in a position of power. It can't be shared power. And yet, when you look at the new style, I read an article recently that talked about how the new style of the trophy wife is not a trophy wife. The new style is a power couple, right? Two people of equal power and ability and skill come together. And that's the new style.
Oh, yeah.
That power couple arrangement is amazing.
Oh, yeah.
When both people give space to the other to be fully empowered, now you get like Bill and Melinda Gates, right?
Yeah. Well, thinking about Bill and Melinda, this actually brings up a very interesting observation that I've made here between two of the founding computer grandfathers, Bill Gates and Steve Jobs. Steve Jobs married a very powerful woman. I think her name is Lauren, and she is like an entrepreneur, a businesswoman. She was very accomplished. And so they married each other pretty much as peers, but clearly the outside world saw Steve Jobs as the head and really the person that showed up. You didn't really see much of his wife coming to the forefront, and they really didn't do things together. And Steve Jobs hit a limit on philanthropy, things he did for the world, the good and influence he made. There might be donations of things he did that I'm not aware of. But obviously, he's not known for his philanthropy as much as he is for his creative ideas at Apple, at Pixar, at Disney, all the places that he had influence over. And then you look at someone like Bill Gates, who also married someone. Bill Gates and Melinda Gates got married, and they're a power couple. And they're front-facing. They do things together as a power couple. Their names are on their foundation. They're in Africa right now, helping people in that continent all over in different countries. And their foundation's making a difference and impact. And you can see the difference between a power couple with both of them front-facing and the kind of the Steve Jobs model, where both accomplished amazing things in the world. Both brought great things to our world. But you just see the difference between that power couple and I don't think Steve Jobs and his wife were not a power couple. I just don't think that they showed up to the world fully stepping into their power as a couple, like Bill and Melinda did, basically.
Yeah, well, I don't think you mentioned something before this podcast. We were talking about this subject before, and you said you didn't really think that there was a lot of room in Steve Jobs' world for anybody else as powerful as him.
That's true. I think he was a one-show man. Like, he wanted to be alpha in any situation, so it would be tough for him to, forward face in that way and co-create something together. Now, Steve Jobs died in his late 50s, I think, so he still had a lot of life potentially that he could have gotten to that place.
Yeah.
And I'm guessing he would have had more years been on his life.
Yeah, potentially. However, I think it's interesting that if you, as a powerful person, don't make room for anybody else to be equally as powerful, then you actually you mentioned it before, you hit a glass ceiling on what you can accomplish.
Oh, yeah.
You actually hamstring your ability to go to the next step if you don't allow anybody else, to be equally powerful in your sphere. Whereas with Bill and Melinda Gates, I mean, I don't claim to know their dynamic. I don't claim to know anything about them. I only know the good that they do with their power couple arrangement. And I don't think they're at all hamstringing their ability to have influence in the world. Like, they really are making a huge difference. And I guess maybe that's the point. Maybe I don't have, like I said at the beginning of this podcast, I don't really have like a strong concept around all this. I just have these disparate pieces of information that I wrestle with when it comes to gender relationships. I find it really intriguing because I don't really feel like super aligned with either gender perspective. I don't feel like men's rights are the important thing or women's rights are the important thing. I think I feel like the more we can hold space for each other being empowered, the more we will have that extraordinary level of influence. It's more about an and situation. We talked about this in the previous podcast of not creating this line in the sand and having to take a position on either side. And I think the same thing happens in a power struggle. Like, we force the other person to have to lose so that we can win. And then we enter a win-lose situation and we become focused on that win-lose situation that occupies all of our time and attention. And we don't actually get anything else bigger done because we're so hyper-focused on that power struggle. And I feel like when we open up space for both people to be fully empowered and to be at the top of their game and to create that power pair dynamic, now you really are unstoppable.
Yeah.
I really feel like you can have so much more influence in the world. And I think it's tough because the old perspective is that one person was powerful and the other one was a supporter. That was the model I was given growing up.
Same
that
here.
One person was powerful and the other person was the supporter of that power. And I don't think it has to be that way. I see this coming up a lot in third wave feminism. Now, I find both first and second wave feminism to have done extraordinary things. I think in the second wave of feminism, there was probably a lot of anger that also surfaced. Understandable anger, right?
Sure.
Like especially watching Mad Men. Like, I don't know how, it feels like the show Mad Men is probably a pretty good representation of the 60s, but as I watch it, I'm like, yeah, I can totally see why women were pissed off.
Oh, yeah.
So it's understandable that a lot of angst came through, and it was probably very healing energy. Like, to be able to be angry about it was probably pretty healing for that generation. That said, I feel like there's a sense of this third wave of feminism that it's almost like they're stuck in... There are a lot of... I'm being really clumsy with my words right now because, again, I'm still really trying to figure this out inside of me. I'm just trying to really, and I know that I've actually had other women feel like my position was very traitorous to women. So I'm trying to be careful to be very accurate with my perception or like with how I state this. And I don't want to indicate that I'm anti-woman by any stretch of the imagination. I want to be as clear with how I feel that women are doing an amazing work and how I feel like they might be sabotaging themselves a little bit, because the self-sabotage, I think, harms all women. You know, when we sabotage ourselves in our presentation, when we present ourselves in a way that's not creating an empowered perception,
Sure.
I think that harms women. And I don't want that to happen because I want women to be fully empowered. I feel like we're stuck in an old victim, villain, hero dynamic. I feel like women continue to see themselves as victims. I think that that's completely understandable based on our genetic memory, because I feel like women and children, right? Anybody who's weak has been exploited, right?
Sure.
And women are physically weaker. That's not to say that they're weak, but they are physically weaker than men. And so therefore men have exploited that for a long time. Understandably, because when you're always thinking in terms of dominance and power, you're going to look for, ways to climb to the top, right? So that's been the old model for a long time. Mm-hmm. So that said, I think that women are used to being victims, and I think they're still looking for ways in which women are victims. I know that I had a conversation with somebody who mentioned on their Facebook page that more people are afraid of sharks than of being raped, and yet 1 in 4 women are raped, and of course it's like really small percentage of people are attacked by sharks. Mm-hmm. So there was this idea of like how men are natural predators and how they're way more dangerous. And I feel like, I mean, yes, rape is an issue. There's no question that rape is an issue. There are sex workers, not sex workers, excuse me. There's sex slaves in this country. In this country, in the United States, there are sex slaves. That's ridiculous, right? Like, what other slavery is acceptable, right? There's actual sex slaves. So obviously there is a problem. And I think to paint men as predators who will go that direction unless we keep them in line, I think that's not helping anything. I think that's incredibly disingenuous to see all men as predators and that they'll just run that direction unless we stop them. I feel like creating this scenario that we're natural victims and they're natural villains, so we need to make sure that that's not the dynamic, right? We have to be, we have to look for a hero that will save us. I feel like that mentality is going to create that reality. Like, the more we see men as predators, as women, the more likely men are going to be predators, right? Because they won't feel an authentic connection with us. They won't feel like we're holding space for them. I was reading a book called Mindhunter, which is all about criminal profiling serial killers. And there is an argument that a portion of it is genetic, no question. When somebody is like sociopathic or psychopathic, that there is a portion of that that's genetic. And yet every single serial killer has an extremely violent past. They have a very abusive past. And a part of it, sometimes the past was sheer neglect, or it was an insistence that the person was bad or wrong. And so they deal with a lot of shame cycles. We can make predators, right? Like, we can make them. We can make them on a micro scale in families, and we can make them on a macro scale in societies. Yeah. If we insist that they're bad or wrong, if we insist upon seeing them in this terrible way, we could actually be making them ourselves, or at least influencing how they're made. We could be a node in the system that creates a predator. So seeing ourselves as empowered, seeing ourselves as not losing any power when we see the other gender as empowered, as being awesome and amazing, and coming to the table recognizing there's room for everybody to be powerful, positive, looking for ways to, solve world issues. I don't think that's being idealistic, and I don't think that's being disingenuous, and I don't think it's being disloyal to our sex. No. I think my speculation is it's the only way to survive. Like, coming to that perspective is the only way that we're going to survive all of these, basically gender wars.
I think words are important, and I think the words power and empowerment are really important. Power seeds, this idea of power seeds that there has to be someone in a position of power and someone in a position of weakness or submission. And I think the word empowerment or empowered means that everyone can be stepping into their own power. In other words, it's not so much about you in relation to somebody else. It's in relation to you. It's about relation of you into yourself. So you step fully into your own internal power, and you're empowered as a person, regardless of a hierarchical stance of in society or with other people. So power seems to be more about this way that hierarchy structures, and empowerment seems to be more about personal development and the personal power you show up with to the table. And I think that's really a key distinction there. When you're talking about empowerment, I believe it's something that everyone can achieve. I don't think it has to be, this person's in power, so everyone else has to be underneath them. we can all be empowered individually to our own selves. And as you're talking about women, I'm sitting here thinking about men and going back to the very beginning of our conversation that we started this podcast with, this fear that men might have of being objectified, especially physically objectified, when that's never been part of our dynamic as men. We've always kind of historically shown up as providers, financial or resource providers, and that's the thing that women came to us for in relationship. And here, now we're entering this new world where that's not necessarily as needed. Like, that's not necessarily the thing that women are coming to a man for. They're coming more for lifestyle, companionship, romance, a lover relationship. And so there's a whole new skill set that men are expected to bring to the table that we as a species, as a male species, have not been developing. So if you're a man listening, I want to give you a call to step up to be a man, because being a man now is not so much about building skill around resource development. There's still part of that. As a man, you need to know how to provide for yourself and others if they are dependent on you. But showing up in more of the soft sciences. Women have been working on themselves for over 100 years, personal development, like intentional personal development. You go to the self-help section in a bookstore, and who are the ones pulling those self-help books off, those personal empowerment books? And if you look at the titles, they're focused on women. Women are reading them. They're spending time building these soft arts of how to relate to people better, how to become a better version of themselves. I don't see a lot of guys, I see some, but not a lot of guys hanging around that section in the bookstore or subscribing to those types of magazines or thinking about those types of things. As males, we don't have a natural tendency toward that because we have a strategy that's worked forever. But I want to give you a call. If you're a guy listening right now, we are entering a new world where working on yourself and becoming the best version of yourself will make that idea of being objectified a little bit irrelevant, because you are going to bring so much to the table as a man in all of these soft arts. And part of working on yourself is looking attractive, I think, is making yourself presentable, dressing better. Like, why not? Why not come to the table and become a better version of yourself in all areas? You might think that's superficial or that's something women do. No, it's something that guys can do too. We can come to the table looking good, being good, having a good perspective, and really showing up as men in this new world. So that's my challenge to you. If you're a guy listening, if you're a man listening, start thinking about ways that you can start working on yourself in this as well as women. And I think if we stop focusing on what the other gender is, quote unquote, doing wrong, or they're trying to gain power here and there, and we focus on ourselves and say, I don't care whether I'm a man or woman, I'm gay, straight, bisexual, whatever, I'm going to focus on myself, become the best version of a human. It's not about men's rights or women's rights or gay rights or transgender rights. It's about human rights. It's about us as humans coming to the table, no matter what our slice of life is or what our flavors are that we like, our preferences, come to the table as a human that's growing and developing as a person. I think that is a powerful and an empowered place to come from.
Yeah, I see both men and women whine a little bit. I'm going to go ahead and use the word whine. Whine about how the things that are not, that are superficial matter so much to people of the opposite sex or the same sex, if that's, like you mentioned, if that's your flavor. This idea that somebody could possibly judge them by the way they look, right? Well, you can resist that all you want, and that's reality. That's just how it works. It's been working that way for a long time. One of the things that we've run into in this generation is that every person that is a potential mate of ours doesn't just see you and all the other men or women in the village. Like a guy who might have seen like 3 pairs of breasts in his life now gets to see literally thousands. Right? Globally, right? Like, he gets to see every pair of breasts on the planet if he wants to do that, right? Like, he can just spend his time looking at breasts all day long. You could set up a lifestyle in which you can do that. So we have competition on a level that is unprecedented, right? Like, we have never dealt with this level of competition. And instead of, there's a book, or not a book, but a really interesting essay by Naomi Wolf called The Porn Myth, where when we entered a time period of porn gluttony, there was this fear, or like the second wave feminists were fearing that porn would turn men into like these aggressive rapists, right? That all they would want to do is, attack women and it's going to hypersexualize them. But what ended up happening was the opposite. They ended up getting inured to sex. And so now their struggle is to create intimacy. Their struggle is to actually enjoy sex with a woman as opposed to just be able to get off. And I found that to be really interesting, that the more competition that there is out there, the more it actually inures them to that piece. So what makes you attractive is not that you are the penultimate, 10, that you are absolutely perfect in every single way. It's actually that you provide something that all of that can't provide, which is the humanizing component of just being a good person. Like just coming to the table, being a high quality human being. So the shallow component is always going to be there. I mean, Eben Pagan as David D'Angelo, his catchphrase is, attraction is not a choice. Well, that's true. Attraction is not a choice. We cannot choose who we're attracted to and not attracted to. And so we are the best version of ourselves physically is going to be the initial attractor. And then after that, because there's going to be a lot of attractive people out there, after that, it's who you are as a human being. And the more empowered you are, that's actually going to vet people. If you're a truly empowered person, it's actually going to vet all the people who are insecure, right? If you're empowered, the more insecure the person is, the less they'll find that attractive. But if they're empowered, the more they're looking for a peer. They're looking for a mate. They're looking for somebody who's at their level. So you're actually vetting for empowered people. And again, there's room at the table for both people to be fully empowered. I love that you created that distinction between power and empowered. There's room at the table for everybody to be empowered. And then when that happens, then the whole becomes greater than the sum of the parts. Now you can do extraordinary things because you're coming together and mixing your talents and your skills and creating a whole new thing. You're co-creating something really big, as opposed to one person gets to be the power broker and the other person just has to support that. I think that's actually an old way of looking at things. And just really being open to this idea, I'm wondering if it's actually going to help neutralize a lot of the issues that we tend to complain about as women. And it's going to neutralize a lot of the complaints that we have as men. If we stop thinking that one person has to win and the other person has to lose, I think a lot of the issues are just going to melt away.
Yeah. We talked about this is a discussion starter, and obviously we want to hear from you.
And this one is this
is sensitive, man.
This is a sensitive topic.
I'm sure, there are exceptions to everything, and there's all sorts of ways to look at this, but we want to hear from you. We want to get some feedback. One of the great places to do this is over at facebook.com/personality hacker. We have a daily growing community of people just like you that are listening to this podcast, that are commenting, that are part of the Personality Hacker community. And we want to continue to grow that community, and we need you to do it because your voice is needed at the table. I think you would bring a great perspective to all the other people that have already joined in and have voiced their thoughts, their opinions, asked their questions, have given their perspective, because your perspective matters. We want to hear from you. So facebook.com/personality hacker. You can also join us at twitter.com/personality hack. And of course, on our website, personalityhacker.com. We've got articles, resources, every podcast, just tons of stuff is coming out there all the time.
And if you like our podcast, we'd love for you to rate us on iTunes. It would be really awesome if you'd be able to do that. So give us some feedback, let us know how we're doing, and also give us some suggestions for future podcasts. Yeah. You can do that in your iTunes rating if you want to, or you can give us suggestions. I get suggestions all the time through email, Facebook, through a lot of different modalities. So let us know what you want us to talk about. Yeah, absolutely. And be sure to subscribe to this podcast because we want to be with you every week and just have you part of the table discussion here. Grab a cup of coffee once a week or take us to the gym, take us on your morning commute, whatever that is. We want you to be a part of the Personality community, and we want to be a part of your daily and weekly life. So we're really excited you're listening and you're part of this. My name is Joel Mark Witt. And I'm Antonia Dodd.
This is the Personality Hacker Podcast. We can't wait to talk to you on the next episode.